I'm Gry Randfeldt, and today we're going to do something a little bit differently. We're going to actually make a totally ordinary, regular review. And the book we're talking about is She Who Became the Sun, a book that really touched me and that I kind of fell in love with. And I just really want to share that without giving any spoilers so that you can become convinced that this is a book that you should definitely give a shot. She Who Became the Sun is the story of Chu, who grows up in a poor village during a famine, which radically changes the way that she views things because she is the only girl who survives in this village, and all of her family is dead except for her father and her brother. And then her brother is foretold this great destiny, while she is foretold that she will become nothing. And shortly thereafter, her father is killed and her brother lies down and dies. And this creates this moment inside her where she's like, how do you dare lie down and die when you could have been great? And I was foretold that I would become nothing. It creates this great sense of bitterness and yearning in her, and so she decides that she will become her brother, that she will take his name and she will go out and be him and take his destiny and become great, because the alternative is becoming nothing. The alternative is dying. And so she goes to a monastery and grows up there. She's basically just trying to survive at this point. She is at the monastery until fate brings her into collision with the eunuch general, one of the Mongols' general. And that's about what I'll say of the plot. It is a very phenomenally written story. Just the prose is so delicious and beautiful, and there were several moments where I had these realizations as a writer that, wow, you can really just sometimes spend time on just the internal monologues of characters. It doesn't always just have to be plot. We can be allowed to dwell with things, and I thought that this book did that very well. I always felt emotionally connected to what was happening, even when I didn't agree with what the characters were doing, and that's really the great thing in this story. You know, you have great characters when they're basically a lot of the time doing stuff where you're like, no, why are you doing this? Or where you're not really agreeing with them always, because when characters are received in that way by readers, it means that you've created a character that really stands for something and really does something unexpected and different, and does something that challenges the reader. And I really love being challenged as a reader, and I was certainly challenged a lot by Chu. And I also just really love watching characters who are that pragmatic and willing to do what's necessary, because I'm not necessarily always like that. So I really admire characters who are like that, even though their moral compass isn't always the greatest, but I like watching that too. I really thought the story handled all of the complexities very well. The relationship between the eunuch general and the prince, who is the son of the man who killed the eunuch's entire family and made him a eunuch, and he loves that prince. That's his best friend, and yet there's bitterness and resentment and frustration. And that's very interesting, and it's very well handled. And I also think that every time the characters do something that's bad, the story handles it very well, especially by juxtaposing it with other characters who have other responses and can sort of show that this isn't the only way to do things. There is a more compassionate way, and you're specifically choosing the non-compassionate way. What I thought this book did really, really well was its themes. It really did this interweaving of the plots and interweaving of the different emotions really well to come together to create this different sense of being. Like, you can really feel the Chinese inspiration in the story, in that spirits are real, and this sense of destiny as a real thing that is guiding your path feels real. And I really liked that. That's very different from a lot of other fantasy. Like, sometimes you have destiny as part of like the chosen one and stuff like that, but this doesn't quite feel like that. It feels like you're searching for a path and you sort of have to follow it. And it felt really interesting how the story created a sense of destiny intervening in things without it feeling like Deus Ex Machina. It really felt like this was always supposed to happen, and if you read closely, it would happen. happen and you would have seen it. So I really liked how you felt like the characters, that you were always pulled along by something greater and that we were always searching for something greater and that we're afraid that that greater thing will reject us. I personally really connected with Chu, and I know that a lot of people online feel like they didn't really connect with Chu. I really loved her and I really appreciate that she exists as a character. It's characters like her that I am partially trying to write because I feel like there are great lessons to learn from her, but also the pain that she feels, this striving for becoming more, wanting to be more, is something that I just really connect with, as embarrassing as that is. I felt validated by her. I felt that listening to her emotional journey really touched me, and there were several moments where I kind of teared up and I just really wanted her to continue, and I loved every moment when she had a chance to stop and she didn't, because you can't, because it's destiny, right? And that's where I really love the theme of destiny in this story. I really felt that it gripped that feeling of you can't stop no matter how much it hurts, no matter if you never reach your destiny, you have to keep going because the alternative is nothing. If you are a fan of history, you will probably like this. I really love how the story takes its time to explain the political and historical setting. If you aren't used to very unfamiliar sounding words or names, whether they be historically correct or just made up in some fantasy story, then this may be a little bit challenging, but I really think that it's a challenge that's worth it. I would say you have to wonder, like, what do you remember things best when they're said loud or when you read them? I listened to the audiobook. That got kind of confusing for me sometimes, but if you really need things to be said and hear how they're said for you to remember them, then I would say you should listen to the audiobook. Which brings us to the audiobook. My feelings on the audiobook are kind of split, because in general, I really loved the narration, except for the male voices. I loathed the male voices. They all sounded like this, like douchebags in high school that you're really not supposed to sympathize with, and, you know, they don't have a lot between their ears, you're not very clever. Like, that was how they all sounded, and it frustrated me. It also just felt downright disrespectful to the characters, and it was, no matter whether they were men that we were supposed to sympathize with or not, they sounded like this. But that was kind of the only thing I didn't like. Otherwise, I really felt that the voice was on point, and I really loved it for Ma and for Chu. Their voices were really great. So the story is sold as like this LGBTQ plus story, but it's not a romance-heavy story. The characters are sort of like, you have one gender fluid character, and then you have the eunuch who really strongly identifies as a man, but who by the rest of the world is not really viewed as a man because he is a eunuch. Those elements are very well written, they really seamlessly fit in and are very beautifully written. I really love that part. I really love the romance. Now, I am kind of a particular kind of romance reader. I don't like, in general, books that are just romance, because I really like plots that force our characters to develop. I like character-driven stories, and typically romances are just kind of meh to me, because the characters, all of the conflicts between them feel kind of convoluted, and so I get frustrated. But that does not mean that I don't love romance. I really love when romance is a strong part of whatever story I'm reading. Now, with that, I don't mean stories, like a lot of YA has an interesting premise, interesting characters at the start, and some love premise, and then the love story just kind of takes over all of it, and I don't like that. I really like when the romance is present to kind of underline what's happening and help the characters grow, to help the characters play off of each other, but all of the characters are there for a reason and have their own journeys, and the romance is not just given or destined, it's something that you work on. And I thought that this book did that very well. I was very happy with the romance. I felt that it invigorated the story whenever it was there, but it wasn't the kind of story where when the romance wasn't there, I was frustrated. Because there are some stories, like The Folk of the Air, I felt like in the third book, I didn't really care much for scenes where the love interests weren't together, which, since they weren't a lot together in that book, it kind of spoiled the experience. Whereas in the 2 first books in that series, I loved all of it. So you really want to reach that point where the romance invigorates but doesn't steal the show. Your plot should be interesting enough to exist without the romance. That was kind of a rant. If any of you have any suggestions to stories that are kind of like that, like Live Ship Trilogy also fulfills those premises, like any recommendations like that, I would love that. Those were my thoughts on She Who Became the Sun. Overall, an amazing book. It's a little slow, I think, for some people, but I generally have a large capacity for slow things as long as it's well, like it's because it has to be well developed. It's because things have to make sense. In general, if a story makes sense, it's going to have to take more steps to get from A to B, because there are just some logical things that have to happen. Whereas if things are more contrived, you can do it faster. But that in general is not as satisfying to me, because I like to see the characters struggle. I like to feel that it's worth it and that it's earned when they reach their goals. And in this story, it definitely feels earned. All the stars for this one. I really, really enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, leave a comment on what you thought of the story. I'm particularly interested in the experience of people who stopped reading it, because I've heard that a lot of people have put it as did not finish, and I'm very interested in hearing why. Was it because of the slowness? Was it because you didn't find Chu compelling as a character? What would have made her more compelling to you as an unsympathetic character? I think those questions are very interesting, especially to me, who tend to write very unsympathetic characters and tend to really enjoy them. So thank you for today. Have a nice day and all of that.